Hi everyone, it's Fiona here from fionamarks.com and I am back with my good friend and colleague, Fernando. Fernando, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hello, my name is Fernando. I try to be an astrologer, and thank you very much, Fiona, for inviting me once again to your lovely channel.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you here. And I proposed this set of interviews to Fernando quite some time ago when I saw his video on the 12 things that you might get wrong about your favorite style of astrology. And this was a 1-hour video that Fernando prepared for our apprenticeship program. And it was full of really interesting insights about the difference between modern astrology, traditional astrology, between Vedic astrology and other types of astrologies. So I found it fascinating. And I wanted to have the chance to talk to Fernando more about it and maybe break it into bite-sized pieces. But on our way to do that, we've actually had really fascinating discussions in general about astrology. And we have covered lots of topics, but basically it's important, if you haven't seen it already, we did a whole discussion about whether Vedic astrology is traditional astrology. So that's quite a large topic and something that sets the scene for what we're going to be doing on the next several videos. So if you haven't seen that, I'll put the link in the description. You can go have a look. So stepping away from the overarching question that we've already answered, let's get down to some nitty-gritty either myths or preconceived ideas that people have that may or may not be true. So that was the original invitation. And today we're going to start with perhaps people have a preconception that Western astrology uses the tropical system and therefore Vedic astrology uses the sidereal system. So we walk around with that kind of distinction in our mind. If we don't know much about astrology, a little bit like you might think some countries use inches and feet and other countries use centimeters and meters and kilometers. You know, you think it's like that distinct. But actually, this is not the case because some Westerners use sidereal, and it turns out that some Vedic astrologers use tropical as well. So, Fernando, why don't you concisely, because we have talked about this topic before, but share a little bit about the tropical versus sidereal misconception or myth that people have about Vedic astrology.
Sure. Okay, to do it fast and easy for people to digest, the big elephant in the room when you talk about the differences between traditional Jyotish and traditional Western astrology of the Hellenistic type, Hellenistic, Perso-Arab, medieval and Renaissance from the European context, you will see that one of the biggest differences is the idea that Jyotish uses sidereal zodiac, right? Why is this? This is the first question you should ask yourself. Why do the Indians use the sidereal instead of the tropical zodiac? The main reason are the nakshatras. The main reason are the uses of the Vedic lunar mansions, because many techniques in Jyotish rely on the Vedic lunar mansions and the relationship between them and the planets. That is the main reason why Indians use the sidereal zodiac. Now, the sidereal zodiac is present today also in Sidereal Western Astrology and in Babylonian Astrology. Sidereal Western Astrology is a form of modern Sidereal Astrology. And Babylonian Astrology, well, people are going to say it's Babylonian, but it's really like a modern take on what Babylonian astrology could have been. Because remember, Babylonia is in the Euphrates and the Tigris in Mesopotamia, and that region has been conquered several times throughout the last 3,000 years. So the idea that pure Babylonian astrology exists is not really historically accurate, to say the least. Then we have the context of the subcontinent of India, where you have that idea of the sidereal zodiac. And that is the main reason why they use a sidereal zodiac. Now, that will vary according to Ayanamshas. The problem of the Ayanamsha is a real problem. Depending on the Ayanamsha you use, then the zodiac is going to be different in terms of the planetary positions. Okay?
Actually,
Now,
let me just pause you there for anyone
oh,
that isn't coming in with that terminology. I guess another way I could phrase our preconception about this is that there's one tropical way of measuring the zodiac and there's one sidereal way of measuring the zodiac.
sure.
And in the language that we're comfortable using, we call it an Ayanamsha. But the truth is that even within sidereal, there's not one sidereal measurement
Exactly.
Agreed either. So that's a preconception that people have, that all Western astrology uses one way and all sidereal uses the same way. And this is not the case. So sorry to step in there. I'll let you.
No, and not only that, we can continue that idea, because that's going to take me where I wanted to go. The idea that there's no such thing as an official Ayanamsha. There is such a thing as an official Ayanamsha, officialized by the modern bureaucratic country of India after independence. So if you want to say that that's the official measurement, which was decided by a bureaucratic organization, not an organization of astrologers, although they were technocrats. I guess they had some knowledge of panchangas and astronomy and all that. But the Lahiri or the Chitrapaksha Ayanamsha is the official Ayanamsha. But there are dozens of Ayanamsha, and there is no such thing as one sidereal zodiac. There are different ways of measuring the sidereal zodiac, but there's only one way of measuring the tropical zodiac. And astronomically, you first measure the zodiac tropically, and then you correct it sidereally using the Ayanamsha, which is the correction, of which there are several.
Yes.
Okay. Now, a very important thing that you have to take into consideration is that they use the sidereal zodiac because of the nakshatras. So the idea is that it doesn't matter. Don't worry about the signs. We're talking about the lunar mansions. So whenever you do Jyotish, you gotta have a sidereal framework. Now, that sidereal framework does not have to directly affect the rashis or directly affect the construction of the 12 symmetrical areas of astrological influence known as the 12 signs. Okay, so that is why some people do Vedic astrology with tropical zodiac, because what they do is they use a tropical zodiac within a sidereal framework of the Vedic mansion so they can use the techniques. So this is very important for people to understand. Jyotish per se, the majority of the people do it sidereally, do it with different Ayanamshas, but there's also a community that does Jyotish with a tropical zodiac and sidereal nakshatras, which is the case of you and me and other people out there around the world. And I believe that with time, that is going to be more predominant. Doing Jyotish with the tropical zodiac opens the doors to other sorts of astrology, and also widens horizons in terms of knowledge, in terms of astrological knowledge. So take that into consideration.
Absolutely.
Not all Jyotish is sidereal. Not all sidereal Jyotish is the same because of the Ayanamshas. And at the same time, you can do tropical zodiac with Jyotish because you're using the rashis tropically aligned, but the nakshatras are still sidereal. And that is why there's such a thing. So, the idea of the sidereal thing, there's a lot of layers. It's like an onion. Because you have to take into consideration a lot of factors that usually in ancient times you would understand from the get-go, because you would be obliged to learn them before you did astrology, because you had to be a mathematician, you had to study astronomy, you had to be a very applied person in terms of your studies of mathematics, geometry, trigonometry, and all that. And those are the things that you have to you don't have to be an expert on these things, but you got to know the basics in order to understand what we're saying, in order to understand what is the problem of the Ayanamsha, what is the problem with the sidereal zodiac, and how the tropical zodiac is more mathematically and astronomically correct. Now, all that being said, it's very important to realize that there's no such thing as a right way to do the zodiac. I prefer the tropical zodiac because there are less problems, but this does not mean that you cannot get a good consultation from a siderealist, which at the same time means that doesn't mean that you're going to always get a great consultation from tropical astrologers. I mean, you can get great consultations from both sidereal and tropical astrologers, and you can get horrible consultations from both sidereal and tropical astrologers. The idea here is that astronomically speaking, the tropical zodiac is wiser. And at the same time, you can apply it to Jyotish within the framework I told you.
Yeah. And perhaps a great advantage in a way of being a student at this time of Vedic astrology is that, we are all asked to learn a little bit about the richness of this debate. And I remember in our apprenticeship, it was a topic that we discussed and were given our own opportunity to research where we could see what made sense or what worked for us. So I think that while Western astrology, you just rock up and it's tropical, when you're studying Vedic astrology, you're going to come to some point where the richness of the history of Sidereal and how it's used and what it applies to, what it doesn't apply to, is going to come up. And that can only make you more aware of the stars in the sky and how the magic of astrology works. So in that way, it's a good thing, although it can be a little confusing. And can I ask you personally, because I started Vedic astrology when this debate had already happened. So for me, the dust had settled, the decisions had been made, and I went down the path of using the tropical Ayanamsha. But did you start as a sidereal Vedic astrologer?
Yes.
Okay. And is there anything that you'd like to share about, so this is not really a philosophical question, it's more a personal question, about your decision and what led you to that change, like what it was like to go from using one system to the other?
Study. I mean, I just continue study and I grasp certain astronomical concepts, visual experiential concepts, and I mean, tropical is the one that makes sense, and then I slowly change. At the same time, you can't necessarily bring all techniques from sidereal to the tropical. Most you can, but some you can't. And I did it slowly because I started studying with the sidereal astrologer and a tropical astrologer, Ryan. And with time, I started first with the sidereal astrologer, and I learned a lot from him. I learned the basics of yogas, of Raya yogas, the basic stuff, which is always the most important thing. But then came a time when I realized the problem of the Ayanamsha. Then I realized the idea that the signs per se do not stem from the stars, they stem from the relationship of the earth to the sun. I then realized that fixed stars, are not fixed, they move. Ancient man didn't know this, and this is very important to realize. And at the same time, you start realizing that stars sometimes explode also, they disappear. I mean, that doesn't happen a lot, but that does happen. And astronomically speaking, I did the change and I never looked back. I learned from Ryan, from Ernst, from other people. And now, that idea of changing has opened the doors to other sorts of astrology in the Hellenistic world, in the Perso-Arab Muslim world, in the Renaissance and medieval European world. And that has opened a lot of doors in that sense.
Yes, I think that's a great point to bring in, Fernando, that although it may be confusing, navigating one's way through this when one chooses as an astrologer what system to use, but actually it reminds us that as astrologers, we're always learning, we're always open to practical, like the actual facts and practically applying it to the real world. And that then gives the opportunity, as you're saying, to rejoin astrologies, the families of astrologies that have accidentally gotten separated. So I'm really glad that you brought that final point in. Fernando, I want to thank you very much for taking some time with me to explore. This was the first myth that you have in your video. I will link your whole video to this discussion. So if people want to get a bit more detail or go a bit further, they can. And I look forward to talking to you again next time about some other preconceived ideas or myths that people have about Vedic astrology.
Thank you once again, Fiona. A pleasure.